Welcome to the Times of Israel's Friday Focus. I'm your host, Deputy Editor Amanda Borschel-Dan, here with our diplomatic correspondent, Lazar Berman. Hey, Lazar, how are you doing?
Hi, Amanda. Glad to be here.
I'm always glad to see you. And I see you are wearing a blue kippah right now, but I want you to wear a different hat today. And that's your hat of being our correspondent to the Christian world.
I will do that with my same blue kippah.
That's fine. I'll let you keep your same blue kippah. And of course, the vast majority of the Zionists in the world are Christian, and Israel's closest allies are also majority Christian or officially Christian countries. And the world's largest Christian denominations have many of their holiest sites in Israel. But at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, there's no advisor for Christian affairs in the prime minister's office. And therefore, events like we've seen in the past week can occur and spiral out of control. So what are these events that we saw in the past week?
Sure. So there was 3 ostensibly unrelated incidents, but as we'll get to, I think they come from a common, I wouldn't say source, but a common mistake that the Israeli government is making and has always made. There was earlier this month on July 7th, there was a fire set in Taiba, which is a Palestinian Christian town in the West Bank. Well known, there's a historic church there from the 5th century. It's ruins, it's an archaeological site. But we've talked about the settler violence that has really grown in the past couple of years, seems to be somewhat out of check. And there were settlers that the reports are that settlers set fire to a field nearby, and the flames crept up and burnt a field adjacent to that site. So that was number 1. Number 2 was there's this kind of quiet visa disagreement that's been going on for a while. When U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee came into office, I believe in March, he sat down with the Interior Minister, Shas's Moshe Arbel, and they seemed to come to an agreement on making sure that Christian groups coming to Israel and Christian organizations in Israel would be able to get their visas approved very easily. There wouldn't be problems with these A3 clergy visas. And any new regulations that had been added would be taken care of, and they'd go back to the smooth process that was in place beforehand. It seems like that agreement was not honored. At least by the bureaucrats within the Interior Ministry. And Huckabee, who's a very big Zionist and a very outspoken supporter of Israel, wrote this very, I would say, furious, the seething letter to Arbel saying that if it does not change, he will have to announce in the U.S. that Israel does not welcome Christian groups, treats them like adversaries, and will enact reciprocal measures against Israelis trying to get visas to the U.S. That is a drastic statement, especially for Huckabee.
And of course, by announcing that he may announce and he's threatening to announce, he actually did announce, right? I mean, all the papers internationally were full of this for a couple of days.
And so this was a letter directly to Arbel, and he also sent copies to Herzog and to Prime Minister Netanyahu and the foreign minister, but someone leaked it. Now, Arbel has no interest in leaking it, so it's quite possible that Huckabee's office was behind the leak. Either way, you're right. It got to the headlines, and it was drastic. And this was talking about evangelical groups, evangelical Christians, and we'll talk about who they are in a minute. And the third incident, which seems unrelated, but we'll bring this together, was that last Thursday, an IDF tank shell hit Gaza's Holy Family Church, the only Catholic church in Gaza. It's a place of shelter. Some 600 people or so were there, Muslims and Christians. It hit the roof and killed 3 people, 3 Christians, and injured several more, including the priest of the church, who is someone who's been quite prominent during the war because Pope Francis, recently deceased Pope Francis, would talk to him almost every night. So you put these things together, it was an absolutely atrocious, awful, no good week for Israel regarding its relations with the Christian world.
So we are going to talk all about this when we're back. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our Christian affairs correspondent, Lazar Berman. So the trifecta of terribleness that you just described, the three incidents which followed, of course, years of harassment of Christians in Jerusalem and vandalism and spitting and all sorts of terrible things that we discussed in a previous podcast, and I will have a link in the program notes, all came to a head with these three incidents altogether. And as I said in the beginning of the program, one of the problems is that the government, or the prime minister's office specifically, has really no apparatus to deal with this. And I want to add another layer here, and that is, of course, Israelis' innate fear of missionizing. And so when you have these large groups of evangelicals, there could be a layer of suspicion among parts of Israel. But what we're going to explain here is that up to 100 million Americans identify as evangelical, and they bring funding and there's significant political clout to the Jewish state, including pushing for the move of the embassy to Jerusalem in U.S. President Donald Trump's first term. All sorts of efforts we have to thank the evangelical Christian crowd, especially in the United States, for. So let's talk about, before we dive in, the slight ambivalence that some Israelis may feel towards this group of devout worshipers.
Okay, so there's no question, and no one should deny this, and no one can deny the fact that most of the history between Christians and Jews is not good for the Jews. Right, really, from the early centuries, once Christians gained the state power of the Roman Empire, it really becomes often quite terrible for Jews in Christian lands. Of course, there's different shades and it changes over the years, but if you're going to look at it, in a broad historical perspective, forced conversions, all sorts of legal restrictions, real Christian anti-Judaism coming out from institutions. Of course, there's some terrible peaks like the Crusades and all sorts of the Inquisition. Of course, the Holocaust, happened Christians on Christian land. And so this is absolutely and quite appropriately burned into the Jewish historical memory. So that should not be ignored. Does that mean that has to dictate the future of the relations? No, it doesn't, but it has to absolutely be acknowledged whenever there's any talk about that. So that certainly has colored the way many Israelis see this, because let's not forget, it's not like if someone's ancestors came from Europe and before the Holocaust, so in a time of great pogroms anyway in Eastern Europe, and also, things like the Dreyfus Affair in France, so basically a Europe that was quite openly anti-Semitic, and they came to Israel, what their memory of living around Christians would be not a very positive one, and they would have brought those attitudes into Israel. And then if you're part of the people that came in the wake of the Holocaust, obviously, as well. So they don't have the experience of people like us who grew up in the Christian West, who grew up in a time, is perhaps, uniquely in history, where things are just quite positive, and you have friends and coworkers, and you are in a surrounded in an environment of Christians who, by and large, treat you very well and with great respect, and you have all sorts of positive relations. So that certainly is a reason why Israelis would see this different than other Jews. That's number one. Now, there's also the fact that most of the kind of the non-evangelical, so the older established hierarchical mainline churches in Israel, most of their flock, most of their congregations are Palestinian. Therefore, either the church themselves, so a lot of mainline Protestant churches have become quite anti-Israel, also because of kind of this leftism. But even something like the Catholic Church, which is much more complex, it has to be careful about how it expresses itself, because it can't alienate the wishes of its parishioners that it's here to serve. Same with the Greek Orthodox Church. So that is another element that adds to the suspicion. And the third, like you mentioned, is missionary work. Obviously, we're a small people. We have experienced forced conversions and all sorts of other pressures over the years, and we certainly don't want that happening in Israel. So there is a lot of suspicion. At times, it certainly goes over into paranoia. But at the same time, you can ask evangelical Christian groups. They'll say, yes, there are people who claim to be just normal Christian Zionists who are coming for missionary purposes. And that's something that we are cognizant of and are trying to take care of. And that's something that is appropriate for Israel to be wary of. I would say that that Israelis and Israel in general is a little bit paranoid about it, and it goes way beyond any appropriate fear about it. You have organizations that pursue this and even end up harassing people that are here for the right reasons. But I think you add those three things together, and again, needs to be historical memory, and it needs to be a topic of conversation. But I think oftentimes it goes into this general suspicion of anything Christian, that the only reason they're here is to convert us. And then there's this other, it's just a lazy stereotype, and we Jews of all people should be sensitive to not doing this to other people, that Christian Zionists, the reason they want to do it is because of this belief that if all the Jews come here, Jesus comes back, and then there's big war, and then we all die or everyone converts. If you bring that, I'm sure there's some people that think that, but if you talk about that with Christian Zionists, either they've never even heard such nonsense, or they'll kind of laugh and be like, let me explain to you why we're here and why we believe what we believe. So I think you add that up, and that explains a lot of the environment here in Israel.
Lazar, you noted the strike on the only Catholic church in Gaza. And of course, as you stated, condemnation poured in from around the world, including from Pope Leo XIV and the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. US President Donald Trump also phoned up our Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, specifically demanding an apology, essentially, for this. And in the wake of this, we saw a week ago that the Latin Patriarch made a visit inside the Gaza Strip, of course, accompanied by the IDF for his protection. But he himself decided it was so significant, the strike, to go into the Strip himself and show solidarity with this sole Catholic church in the Gaza Strip. So elaborate a little bit about the importance of this relationship, please.
Yeah, so like I said, the relationship with the Catholic Church, which is the biggest Christian denomination, 1.4 billion in the world, that in and of itself should make it, it renders it very important. Again, the Catholic Church throughout history has had some pretty dark times in its relations with Jews, but that has shifted significantly since the 1960s in the wake of the Holocaust and the creation of the State of Israel, what we call Nostra Aetate, which was this groundbreaking document put out by the Vatican, which has defined its relationship with the Jews ever since. You add that up with the Vatican finally recognizing Israel in the 1990s, there are important positive trends. I think people don't realize, first of all, that any of our relationships with important Catholic countries, so if you think Italy, France, Spain, whatever happens with Catholic churches and Christian sites in Israel and to the Christian communities in Israel is an important part of the diplomatic relationship. That is something that is always on the agenda. It always comes up with the French. When the French is an important relationship, also a complex relationship, they have these 4, let's call national domains around Jerusalem, including 2 churches in Jerusalem. And they're very, very particular about, where Israeli police can stand and where it moves over to French staff. And I believe it was February, the French foreign minister was here, and a trip to talk about all sorts of things, especially Iran, the war in Gaza. But it was overshadowed by, on his last day, he went to visit a church on the Mount of Olives, and the Israeli police got it wrong. And he didn't even go into the church, and that was the headlines. And this had happened before with French presidents who came here as well. So that overshadows relations with very Catholic countries. But in general, our relations with our closest allies are all either majority Christian countries or countries that are officially Christian countries and have a cross on their flag, and their heads of state are Christians. Even in the U.S., which is a majority Protestant country, but the previous president was Catholic. Obviously, conservative Catholics are very, very prominent in the current administration, and you always have senior officials who are Catholic. So, what happens here in the Holy Land at the key Christian sites, including Catholic shrines, will resonate around the world, including with our closest friends. And when we get that wrong, that will absolutely, whether we get it wrong with the sites, we get it wrong in our relations with the Vatican, that is absolutely going to color our relations with the world. So that's in terms of the Catholic world. Now, we can say the same for the Orthodox world, right? Somewhat smaller. It's about half as big. But think about countries in Eastern Europe. Obviously, the Greeks and the Cypriots, very, very close allies. Our foreign minister this week was in Moldova. That's a new country, a very pro-Israel country in Europe. We just opened an embassy there. Think about Russia. So, the importance of the Orthodox Church in Russia. Even for all the issues that we find ourselves on opposite sides with the Russians, that's a very key relationship, security, economy. So all these countries care deep. They have assets here in terms of churches. It's part of their influence in the world. It's part of their identity. And now that we have civil control over the areas where their church is in, and we ultimately make policy there, when we get it right, it's a good thing, these relationships. When we get it wrong, we feel it, and they're very vocal about it.
Let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our correspondent to the Christian world, Lazar Berman. Lazar, you just spoke about the global diplomatic importance of course, having ties with the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. But in the United States specifically, it's definitely the evangelicals that one may think that we want to have a solid relationship with. There are something like 100 million Americans who identify as evangelical, and they have huge lobbies and organizations such as the Christian Zionist organization, Christians United for Israel. And according to your piece, there are more members in that organization, in Christians United for Israel, than there are Jews in the United States. And they push for things such as moving the embassy to Jerusalem, things of that nature that, of course, all Israelis stand behind. There are other groups, such as the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. And this group, I learned a lot through your piece of what they're doing behind the scenes. So give us a little window into what the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem has done.
Sure. So in general, on evangelical Christians in the United States, or a variety of different groups and churches, often localized, and there's not really these aren't hierarchical organizations like the other churches we mentioned, but the U.S. is a pro-Israel country because of Christians, not because of Jews. And Zionism in the U.S. has been a Christian priority long before it was a Jewish one. Now, some of the most prominent organizations, as you mentioned, QFI, has about 10 million members. That's more members than Jews in America. This other very interesting one, it's not only American. I think they're active in 180, 190 countries. ICEJ, International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. So I'm sure you've seen this during Sukkot holiday. There's this big festival and parade through the streets of Jerusalem with Christian Zionists from all sorts of countries that come out in their national outfits, and it's a total party, and the Brazilians come, and Pacific Islanders, and it's a whole thing. That's the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. They put out a ton of very well done videos and seminars, and really spread a love for Israel in the world much better than Israeli official diplomats do, in my opinion. Now, something else they do is they have their own basically diplomatic initiatives that have been extremely effective. So if you think about these smaller countries that have moved their embassies to Jerusalem, think Papua New Guinea. Why on earth is Papua New Guinea, going to stick out its neck to move its embassy to Jerusalem? Fiji. Why are the Fijians so pro-Israel? Why are all these Pacific Island nations, Micronesia, voting with Israel at the UN, voting with Israel in the US? And then you have some Central American countries as well. It's because the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem has literally sent people out there to, spread, first of all, their Christianity, but also to spread Christian support for Israel. So that's the reason that they are moving their embassies. And when Papua New Guinea's leader was here and he was announcing the move, he absolutely said that it's because we are a Christian country and this is what Christians should do. So they are having effects with things that Israel sees as a strategic priority that Israel is not able to do itself, right? And it's not like they're being paid to do it. This is what they believe in. This is what they're going to do. And again, you mentioned the reach. So 100 million evangelical Christians in America, not all of them pro-Israel, but that's what the majority are. But the majority of evangelicals are not even in the U.S. Countries like Brazil, massive. Parts of Africa, even countries like South Africa have a significant Christian Zionist element. You go to China, Korea. I mean, these countries are important countries, and these organizations are spreading, the support for Israel through that lens of this being, the fulfillment of God's word. And these are very dedicated people, and they're not necessarily wealthy, but they might save up their money for that one trip to Israel, and they'll pray for Israel. And, if any of the listeners have driven through South America or Central America recently, that was used to be a Catholic stronghold. More and more you see Jewish stars and Israeli flags because it is becoming more and more evangelical. And this is really a central part of it.
So it's not as if everyone in the prime minister's office or in his sphere is unaware of this. And there's one in particular who is very aware of it, and that is Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer. And he said very controversially at a 2021 conference that Israel should prioritize the, quote, passionate and unequivocal support of evangelical Christians over that of American Jews. He said, people have to understand that the backbone of Israel's support in the United States is the evangelical Christians. And you are, of course, arguing that it is potentially across the world, not just in the United States, that these evangelical Christians are the backbone of support for Israel. But at the same time, Lazar, there is nobody, it appears to me, tasked with addressing this community in the prime minister's office. So why is that?
Yeah, so it's not only Dermer. So Dermer certainly recognizes it, and I do agree with him on the U.S. that the backbone of the support is through Christians, not through Jews. Obviously, Israel has to be very aware of what Jewish priorities are as well, because that's its mission in the world. But also Netanyahu. There's never been a prime minister with such a close relationship to evangelical Zionists than Netanyahu has, and his long terms have coincided with the increasing political power of evangelical Christians in the United States, and Israel increasingly becoming a central plank of their platforms. Now, this is a problem that I identify, is that these people recognize it, but why are there consistent problems coming up, not only around evangelicals, but Christians in general, right? That affect, whether it's evangelical, Catholic, Orthodox, they affect and they pay attention to it, and they affect the way they see Israel. If you remember in 2018, there was this tax fight with the Jerusalem municipality, with the churches in Jerusalem, and they closed in protest the Church of the Holy Sepulchre for 3 days, which is it's an important site for not for Protestants, but for Catholics and Orthodox
and Coptics and all sorts of different. There's about 14 or something different types of Christians who use that as their church.
Very true, and it is a pilgrimage site, and when something happens there, when it's in the headlines, they're going to pay attention. Now, so they closed it. It was a very effective move. So what happens? Prime Minister Netanyahu and Tzachi Hanegbi are the ones who have to, after the fact, find a solution. And they did so. But that's the pattern you see then, and it's still the pattern that you see now. With this visa fight, it was Netanyahu had to get involved and sort out the thing after it became a problem. Why? Because there's no one who's tasked with focusing on our relations with the various Christian denominations, the Christian world, the Christian priorities, and making sure that these problems are solved ahead of time. Someone that understands the issues and is in touch with the players, and is able to see these problems developing before they get out of control. He or she also would serve as an address for these groups to talk to, and it has to be someone with influence who can affect policy across the board. Because what do we see happening when this is not given an overall vision and strategy? Then the priorities of certain bureaucrats or ministers who don't care or don't know about our relations with the Christian world will end up taking decisions for their own parochial concerns that will actually have strategic damage to these relations. So that's what we saw in the Interior Ministry. We have these functionaries, call them bureaucrats, let's be nice, installed by Shas, who are probably somewhat hostile to this idea and don't understand it. That's their worldview. But they are able to make problems within their little office in the ministry that have these strategic effects and get us into a fight with the United States. That is terrible. It's hard to understand who exactly is at fault, but the police are not stopping these settlers from burning things, and they continue to carry out attacks in and near Taibe. That is going to resonate as well. And you had Huckabee go to that place as well. And you had Lindsey Graham, who was one of Israel's biggest supporters in the Senate, also say on Fox News very angrily that, he's not happy with what's going on and someone has to be punished. And then with the Holy Church, the Holy Family Church in Gaza, it's different. It's not that anyone was aiming at the church. It's unimaginable to me that that was a target. But if you don't recognize the sensitivity of that site, first of all, because there's 600 civilians shelter in there. Second of all, because it is the only Catholic church in Gaza, and it's one that the Pope has been paying a lot of attention to. And if anything happens there, it is going to look so bad for Israel that the IDF knows how not to hit stuff when it knows it can't, right? So anywhere where there might be hostages, it has drawn these polygons on map that no operations can happen there. We don't bomb anywhere near there. We stay away because there might be intelligence about a hostage there. We should have had the same protocol in place around this church, because no matter what, you don't fire in that direction. You check your angles of fire, and nothing is going to fly toward anywhere near that church that could possibly hit it. That's what should have been. But since the army, understandably, is focused on the tactical fight, and they're not thinking about our relations with the Christian world, right? This is what happens. And when you don't have someone pulling all these different interests together, they're not able to, that tax fight was between the Jerusalem municipality and these churches. And Jerusalem municipality has real, financial problems, and they made a decent case, but you have to make sure it's dealt with quietly ahead of time. You don't have someone in that position. So if I was going to look for a solution to all these things, there needs to be a senior office. By the way, the Arab country, our Arab neighbors, and the Palestinian Authority, who we say, we're so much better with them and our treatment of minorities, especially Christians, they have people that this is their job. We need to have that as well. Someone senior, someone who is educated on this, understands, is passionate, and is open to the concerns of these communities. It's not only the big church, it's also local Christian communities. Are we giving them what they need in order to be flourishing minority communities in Israel? Can they get land when they want? Can they bring in brides easily to marry when they're not from Israel? All those concerns are very hard to deal with, especially when it is split between the foreign ministry and the interior ministry and the police and the prime minister's office and the municipalities. You split that up, you get this incoherent and often harmful policy, even when no one really is trying to harm it, and people generally, support this, and they say this is an important relationship. But they say personnel is policy, and right now we don't have the personnel.
Okay, so you published this in an op-ed this week, which again, I'm going to link to in the program notes. And have you gotten any response from official Israel on this idea of creating some kind of office for the Christian world and Christian communities here in Israel?
I got a lot of responses from Christian groups who loved it, and a lot of comments, and people reached out to me saying that I express a lot of what they support or what they're feeling when they're, trying to support Israel and not always feeling welcome. I have not gotten any response from official Israel. I don't expect them immediately to make that change, but hopefully the right people will see it and they'll think that there's a serious case to be made, and they'll have to understand that, if they don't make that change, these problems will keep happening. We have a coalition system. Everyone's kind of pulling in their own directions. There's not one overarching policy. There's a bunch of different parties with their own priorities, and none of them are getting elected on their relations with the Christian world. Let's believe that. But we have to understand, as a responsible state, as a state that often makes very intelligent policies, but this is one where we consistently haven't, because there is not an individual or an office that has the power and has the mission to be thinking and making policy on this.
Lazar, thank you so much for all of this food for thought.
Thank you.
And Shabbat Shalom.
And Shabbat Shalom to you as well.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Friday Focus. Please check out another installment next week. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, Lazar is happy to answer you. No, I'm just kidding. I'll answer you at podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until next week. Shalom.